and welcome to Graphic Policy Radio, the comic podcast for folks who love comics and want to talk about them at greater depth and length. And I'm really excited to have this episode today where we'll be focusing on the new series, Mr. Miracle. I'm hosting today. My name is Ilana Levin, a.k.a. Ilana Brooklyn. I'm a massive fan of Jack Kirby's Fourth World in particular. And this new series, the Mr. Miracle miniseries, is brought to you by Mitch Gerads and Tom King. DC Comics is revisiting Jack Kirby's masterpiece, The Fourth World, in a new Mr. Miracle series. And it's, been called by lots of critics the best comic of the year and, a worthy tribute to one of the King of Comics' most personal works. I really wanted to have the opportunity to just have an open and in-depth conversation with a couple of my fellow critics about what we like about the series, what would be things we have different kinds of feelings about other than and really give this work its due because it's a really dense and fascinating comic, really worthy of discussion. If you haven't begun reading the series yet, I think you should. We'll have a really brief, spoiler-free introduction in the beginning, and then we'll be going into full-on spoiler territory because this is the space we're going to be doing real comics analysis here. But the quick series description is, Scott Free is the greatest escape artist that ever lived, so great that he escaped Granny Goodness's gruesome orphanage and the dangers of apocalypse. He traveled across galaxies and set up a new life on Earth with his wife, the former female fury known as Big Barda. Using the stage alter ego of Mr. Miracle, he made a career for himself, showing off his acrobatic escape techniques. He has even caught the attention of the Justice League, which counted on him and Big Barda among its ranks. You might say Scott Free has everything, so why isn't it enough? Mr. Miracle has mastered every illusion, every stunt, pulled off every trick except one. He has never escaped death. Is it possible? Our hero is going to have to kill himself if he wants to find out. And joining me as my guests on this brave venture are two amazing critics who I've been really super excited to join on the show. Meg Downey is a freelance comics journalist and historian who focuses on superheroes and fandom. You can find her work at CBR, GameSpot Universe, and at DCComics.com. Hello, Meg.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Meg's podcast as well, which is called Boy Troubles, which I highly recommend folks subscribe to. It is a podcast for people who are not men to talk about the male characters who we love in popular culture at length. And I feel like I've gotten a lot out of listening to it.
Thanks. Hopefully it'll be back soon. I plan on resurrecting it. It has been kind of on hiatus for a few months, but I'm not giving up hope. I've just been really, really busy.
I hear that. You've gone freelance, so.
Yeah.
And I also always think of Meg as being, it's the other person who was not an older man on the Kirby panel that we were at Comic-Con. So we have, I'm also, I too am not an older man and I love Jack Kirby. Isn't that amazing? So thank you for joining me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
And also joining me is Anthony Otero. He is a two-time novelist and recent contributor to the Puerto Rico Strong Anthology, which we discussed on the podcast last week, which is an amazing fundraiser for Puerto Rico hurricane relief. Anthony is also the newest member of the BlackComicsChat podcast. Hello, Anthony.
Hello, everyone. How are you?
And, we actually met New York Comic Con as well because you were on the Latinx and Comics panel and just constantly blowing my mind saying amazing things, which is why
Thank you.
Which is why I went out of my way to recruit you for this as well. So each of us is kind of coming at this from a little bit of a different situation. I'm approaching this comic from the standpoint of, someone who is a hardcore Jack Kirby fan, particularly of the Fourth World. Big Barda and Mr. Miracle mean an extreme a great deal to me, to the point that they are actually on our wedding invitation. My husband happens to look a dead ringer for Scott Free, especially with his hair before he grew it longer. And we literally for our wedding invitation, we did one of the images from the Wild Wild Wedding issue that was the end of the original series in 1972. And they photoshopped Jean Grey's orange hair on top of Barda, and that was me and Frank, my husband, on our wedding invitation. And I love Kirby. I have Kirby tattoos. I'm coming at it from that. I'm not someone who came into this really knowing Tom King's work or Mitch Gerads' work at all. I know that they're, big critical darlings, but they really aren't folks I've read much of. So this was my first introduction. The new Mr. Miracle series is my first real introduction to both of them. And I definitely have been loving the series. I have things that I have concerns about and things that I don't necessarily know if their analysis is where I sit with the characters, but I really do love the series and I do endorse it. Meg, where are you coming at this from?
Oh, man, I'm actually almost not totally the opposite, but I was a Tom and Mitch loyalist coming in for the new series because I actually was on vacation. I was in Paris when the announcement happened, and I was laying, because, of course, at the time was time zones were all wonky, of course, and so I'm laying in bed in the middle of the night, checking Twitter, and Tom posted that, he posted teaser panels of, Scott and Barta's hands or something, and, something about Orion or something that happened. Just totally out of context, doing that promotional thing of here's what I'm working on next. And I sat bolt upright in bed, it's 3 a.m, oh my God, this is amazing. So I love Kirby and I love comics history specifically. So this series kind of represented the perfect intersection of things that I was excited about. I came to Tom and Mitch through, Tom I found at Grayson, which was really his first major comics superhero work, because I am a Bat Family loyalist. So I discovered him through that. And then Tom and Mitch did Sheriff of Babylon together, which is a really amazing, not at all Cape and Cowell book, about real world drama. It's about the Iraq War. It's about Tom's experience as a CIA agent. And so I knew that I knew what their kind of collaboration looked like based on that. And when I saw that they were doing this together, I was stop everything. This is going to be amazing.
Oh, no, I did part of Grayson, not part of it. I about it. I should know these things, but regardless, Tony, how did you look into this?
So, for me, it's interesting. I feel like I come through this from a blank slate. While I have always been aware of, the New Gods and Darkseid and stuff like that, I haven't really read much of them. As a kid, I was always very picky in what I read. Mm-hmm. So most of my knowledge about Mr. Miracle and New Gods and Genesis is based on Justice League and Justice League Unlimited, which I'm okay with because I think that they did a pretty good job in sort of embodying those characters based on how I'm reading the books now. So the characters that I see in the book pretty much coincide with what I know of them through the cartoons. So, and I've heard of Tom King and the amazing work he's doing with Batman. We've talked about this at length on BlackComicsChat, just how amazing Tom King is writing Batman. So I was excited to read this, and when I read the first issue, I was I'm all in. So, yeah, I'm pretty excited to talk about all this.
Yeah, that's great. So I would say from here on out, guys, you're listening to a podcast with people who are all telling you to go check out Mr. Miracle. Different perspectives in this, so go read it. And then when you're done reading it, come back, because from here on in, this is an 100% spoiler-filled podcast. We're going to cover episodes 1 through 7, the whole way through. Births, deaths, explosions, beheadings, and I mentioned birth. I mean, this is it. You're listening to it. We're all no holds barred. So get ready to dive in. Let's get started with this. Meg, are there things that you feel like a series like this really has to achieve in order to do its duty to the source material? Does that matter even at all to you?
Oh, absolutely. I come to analysis of comics that are, based on really seminal works, kind of from a weird place, because I'm of two minds of it. I don't like the idea that, there has to be a definitive interpretation of any one character, especially for superheroes, because I think that stagnates them. So I don't want to be, I don't want to say that King and Gerads have to completely replicate exactly what, Kirby was trying to say with Fourth World or with Mr. Miracle, as a series. But I do think, when you're dealing with characters from Jack Kirby specifically, I think that there is a density to them that has to be achieved. You know, like there has to be, you can't really just do like a Mr. Miracle story and just have him kind of being like a jokey superhero. And that, like, that just feels like it's not necessarily bad. It just doesn't feel like it's, you know, kind of achieving the full breadth of what he can achieve, which is, you know, always a little disappointing when that happens. And so I think that Tom and Mitch are kind of coming to this story at the right angle. You know, even though it's definitely not, it's not in the same mold as maybe the Fourth World was originally. It's not the same sort of like sci-fi adventure. But it's definitely kind of achieving that density. And I think that density is the most important part.
I mean, I was talking with a friend of mine who is new to comics, more or less, about the New Gods and why I was really excited to see Ava DuVernay being the director who's going to be directing the New Gods movie.
Yeah.
And as I was explaining the significance of the characters Orion and Scott Free and Barda, she just immediately just said, "This is some biblical shit." And I was like, yes, exactly. This is some biblical shit. Because if you're explaining the pact, which is the origin story really of, you know, how Scott Free came to be a new god who was born on New Genesis but raised on Apocalypse, and Orion, who was, you know, literally the son of Darkseid but was raised by Highfather on New Genesis. Because of the peace deal that was made between their two planets. You know, that is like the most freaking biblical story. And the thing that means so much to me in terms of the relationship between Scott and Orion and Barda, and this is the math that I'm really struggling with as we read this, is, you know, with Scott and with Scott Free, a.k.a. Mr. Miracle, and Orion, a.k.a. Orion. You're looking, his human alias was Orion, like just like it was an Irish name. It's kind of amazing. You know, Kirby is asked, basically the theory for me is like Kirby gets asked the question, is humans' goodness nurture or nature? Is it nature or is it nurture? And Kirby's answer is that humans can be good, period. He is making the argument here that, you know, you have Scott Free, who has the, quote, good genes, basically, quote, who is raised in a terrible, abusive environment. And with that, he goes and he seeks out freedom. You know, he's not initially the first hero out there who says he wants to save the world. He first wants to save himself and chooses independence and freedom. And then you have Orion, who has the evil genes, but who was raised in the good and nurturing environment. And while Orion still has the bad temper and moods and is bellicose, he's a good person and he's a hero. And he completely tries to sublimate his rage in order to serve the world and like fight against Darkseid and do what's right. And so the answer is both are good. And then throw in Barda. I mean, Barda has no external reason for being a hero who risks everything, risks her position of leadership in order to help fight against Darkseid. But she does, partially out of love. I mean, and then also because she realizes it's the right thing to do. So this is, to me, these characters are Kirby's takedown of the idea that biology is destiny.
Sure.
And I feel really strongly about that. And that's sort of the lens that I've been pushing on everything throughout I've been reading this. And, of course, this is stuff that, like, you know, if you're someone who's not coming at it with all this weight in history, might not necessarily be the important part of the the reading experience for it. And, you know, one of the main things that we're looking at is we're looking at a story with an unreliable narrator, right? We have Scott who attempts to commit suicide in the beginning of issue 1, and we don't really know. You know, we can't know yet exactly. Like, the whole thing is very clearly unreliable narrator. I want to sort of push off the question of, like, what do you think is happening towards the end? But definitely, I think, like, a key piece of what we're looking at is something where there is a lot of uncertainty about how we're supposed to read things. And look, we're talking about a comic midway through, right? We're, like, literally in the middle of the story arc here. So, Anthony, I would want to sort of come to you. Like, you definitely said you got grabbed from issue 1. Like, what was it coming at this from there that made it attractive to you, that got its hooks in you?
for me, excuse me, for me, it has a lot to do with I feel like his psyche and his conscience are fractured in some way. And we don't know by what, obviously, and I've always been very attracted to the flawed hero. And I think that being that he grew up on, Apocalypse, I think he has been witness to a lot of things. So the way I read this book is we're reading it through the lens of his PTSD, of being an Apocalypse, of being this person who has been through so much. And I think one of the things that we never really see with heroes who, fight the good fight, who, survive death, who survive all this stuff, depending on which arc you read, you really don't get that sense of, well, how are they doing mentally? And I feel that Scott struggles, with everything that sort of happens, and he's struggling particularly with the notion of what a god is, and I think it's really messing with his mind. So I think he thinks he knows what it is, but I'm not really sure that he understands that he is trying to escape his own narrative in that sense. Like when you start hearing, seeing Darkseid is, for example, we don't know where he's going. I don't think he knows where he's going, and I think there are panels that sort of have this blurred TV effect, as if the channel is sort of wavy. And I think, again, it's one of those things where either his perspective is changing, or the way he views things is just askewed, because he may just have, again, issues with everything that's happened to him. So that type of narrative, the imperfect narrator or the unreliable narrator, is very interesting to me, because I think in most books you might say, well, I kind of know what's going to happen. I have no idea what's going to happen. I have no idea where this is going. I have no idea. The bantering between him and Barter is amazing, and it just adds to this story of what is happening. So yeah, that's what drew me.
Sure. I 100% agree. Like, I love the idea that you can't tell whether or not, like, Scott's just crazy.
Right.
Like, you have no idea. Like, I love, like, when, like, Oberyn starts showing up, like, you're like, oh, is he just losing it? Or is it like, like, is this all real? Like, I love that. I absolutely love that about it.
How do you guys feel about that sort of visual effect that Gerard uses with the TV sort of look of the TV tracking and registration glitch? Like, how do you feel about that particular motif that he uses a lot throughout the series?
I think it's used very well, and I think that if you're someone who's watched TV their entire life, it's unsettling because you just want the picture to be clear. And I think as a writer, I don't know how he's able to communicate with the artist to do that, or exactly where it should be. But I think it's fascinating. I think it really adds to the narrative.
It's been something that I've been trying to focus on. Like when I analyze Mr. Miracle as a comic, I really try to pay a lot of attention. I probably pay more attention to the art in Mr. Miracle than I do any other comic that I read, which sounds really bad when I say it like that. It's like I'm not ignoring the art in other comics, but there's so many little moments, especially when you're working with a comic that's like almost exclusively the 9-panel grid, where it's like it's so structured and yet it's so like there's all these little moments that are completely anti that structure. Like they're breaking their own rules. But what does it mean when they do that? Like I don't know if I figured that out yet or not. Like I want there to be a pattern, and there isn't a pattern. And I want there to be, clarity, or like I want there to be a rhythm to it. And a lot of times those little moments of like the bendy dots and the static and the the missing panels, they throw me off. And I think that's intentional, but it makes it a challenge to read, but in like a fun way. Like I'm always engaged in it, which is very, it's super fun and tricky.
And it also feels like you're getting a lot for your money with the comic book. There's comic books where, they start doing, 3 or 4 panels and you're done. Within like 2 minutes, where this one is a constant like 9 panels or maybe sometimes less, but you're getting a lot of stuff in it. You know, so you definitely, it's definitely worth that in its weight.
Yeah, it's one of those things where there's like a page in the 9 panels, like this is my favorite page, like maybe in the whole series. I think it's in issue 2, maybe it's in 3. I don't have the book in front of me right now, which is bad on my preparation, but where they're talking about, Scott and Bart are talking about their relationship to Granny Goodness. And they go through and they're talking about how, like, well, did she love you, or did, you know, like, do you think she actually cared about you? And Scott's kind of relating a story about whether or not he believed Granny showed him kindness. And there's this moment where the page breaks the 9-panel grid and becomes like an 8-panel grid, and there's an extra, like, the panels linked together, and it's this weird moment where, like, why did that happen? Why did that break it? But then you look at the narration, and it's this moment where Scott's prescribing, like, this totally non sequitur thing that Granny did for him, like, that she was kind to him. And so it's like his story is breaking the mold, and the page is breaking the mold, and that's just so cool. Like, it's just so, like, finding little moments like that. It's just like, beautiful, perfect.
You know, speaking about, like, favorite parts, there is this one page, it's in issue 5, and it really hit me as sort of this biblical moment, even though I don't know if I feel like it was meant this, but I forgot what page it was. But there's a point where you know, Barta and Scott getting freaky, and she ties him to the bed, right? And it looks like this. The way it's laid out, it looks like the crucifix.
Yeah,
it looks like
thank
he
you.
is
Okay.
that honestly, as a recovering Catholic, that blew my mind. I was just like, wow.
I have issues. Crucifix page. Yeah.
But it's supposed to be there. Just, like, that's, There's, like, a lot of different ways to tie, like, if you weren't supposed to associate Scott with Jesus, they would have had him tied spread eagle. Like, that's just... Right. Like, that's that.
Right.
So, yes, you're supposed to see Jesus. This isn't just because of your Catholic upbringing. It's all okay. It's okay. It's okay. I'm Jewish. I see it too.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Let's talk about that scene. I have so many feelings. With the world's greatest escape artist, and you also see this in how these were the characters that were referenced so heavily in the Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay, of course, right? So, okay, guys, go read the book, whatever. Obviously, like, you're going to have, you have this gigantic, strong woman. She's like 7 feet tall, and she's solid. And if you're drawing her any other way than that, I will punch you. And her husband is an average height guy who's muscular but slight, right? Kind of a Jesus build, if you think about it. And so, people are going to read into that a certain sexual dynamic, which may or may not be real. But what is real is he is an escape artist. So guess what? Chances are that sexual dynamic is there because he is an escape artist. So it's like, no, guys, this isn't about the size difference. This is about what he does for a job. Like, what his superpower is, what his calling in life is. So we here, brought to you in the year 2017 of our Lord, you had the first issue of, like, that I'm aware of. I haven't read a ton of the non-Jack Kirby portrayals of Barta and Scott. Like, I've read Justice League International in pieces. I enjoy it greatly, but I haven't read the whole thing. I didn't read their separate series with, like, Booster Gold. I've read some pieces of it, whatever. I'm not an expert at what they did after Jack is what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. Some awareness, but not full. I think this is the first time there's been, like, completely, like, they are having bondage in their sex, like, confirmation thing that there's been in the story. And I think comics really shies away from, like, being explicitly clear when it's talking about sex. I think it has inherited some of the comics code hangers on, especially where superheroes are concerned. So I was really impressed that the comics, like, did that. How did you guys feel about that sequence?
Oh my God. I opened that, like, I flip through. I'm terrible about reading comics. I spoil myself constantly. Like, I'm not a person who, like, waits. So, like, I just flip books open. And I think I picked up that book, like, earlier, whenever I was picking up my review copies, and, like, opened it, and that was the first page I opened to, and I was like, oh, all right, cool. This is
you were on the subway, and
I was, like, standing in the DC office, like, oh, okay, cool. But I love it when anytime a comic has the opportunity to, like, just go for it. Like, don't hedge around it. Like, clearly this is a mature reader's book. Like, if you got through issue 1 and you didn't think like, okay, this is some real stuff that's going to happen in this book. Like, we're not candy coating it. We're not sugar coating it. Like, if you're going to show the violence, you can also show the sex. Like, why is one, like it shouldn't be,
right.
Like the sex should be more shocking than the suicide attempt. Like, it's, like, I think that it's great that they're allowed to do both.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, and let's be real. They're husband and wife. I mean, what do you think is going to happen? You know what I mean? I think that what it shows for me, and I thought, again, this was a fantastic scene, is his willingness to not escape his love for her. You know what I mean? And I think that he even mentions that as well. So, that whole scene with him being tied it is kind of funny because it's like, okay, well, he can escape that, like,
right.
very easily, but why would he want to? And I think that's the difference when we're talking about this point of there was this point in the story where she was like, you're imagining yourself in this box. You know what I mean? And he's like, well, maybe, but it's more than the box,
Right.
So and I think he sees her as something he would never want to escape from. Why would he?
Right. Yeah.
But I love that little panel in the middle of the grid there where you see his hand kind of coming out the corner. So, he just couldn't help himself. He wanted to touch her, and it's, like, so sweet. I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so funny because normally,
I'm really glad.
Normally I don't, like, really engage with, like, this is me being, like, a loud queer comics analyst, but, like, normally it's really tricky for me to engage with, like, heterosexual love on the page because I'm just like, okay, whatever. Like, I don't really care. It's it's fine, but it's not gonna, like, really hook me. But Barda and Scott hook me, and it's even like the added layer that I don't usually really enjoy, the, like, trope of, like, the forbidden heterosexual love in comics where it's like, oh well, they're both coming from these two different places and they really shouldn't be together,
right.
which Scott and Barda kind of have that, not terribly, but, like, they still, have that, like, almost Romeo and Juliet, sort of like they're two people who are on the opposite sides of a very powerful thing that, should be pushing them apart, but ends up pushing them together. But something about the way that they're done is so, like, I don't know, self-aware of how, like, of their circumstances, of how their relationship comes across, of the power dynamics in their relationship. It just sells me on it. It works 100% for me.
Absolutely.
And I appreciate that Mitch doesn't always try to do these glamour angles of her. Like,
he
will draw Barda from below, which is not flattering, but it's hot anyway. And I admire this. Like, you're showing the less flattering angle. You're allowing her body to have weight and heft, and she still looks great. I do have one quibble in, like, I don't know if it's at issue 1 or 2, Barda says, oh, I'm too tall. I do not believe for a fucking minute that Barda thinks she's too tall. Barda can definitely be critical of her appearance because this is something that, like, everyone deals with. I don't think that being too tall would be the thing she would be critical about her body.
Oh, man.
But whatever.
See, I don't know. I think I love the idea. I love the dynamic of Barda kind of having these insecurities, especially that are coming directly from Granny, that, like, she is totally open about the fact that, like, well, Granny said I was too tall, or Granny said this. And it's just, like, as a person who grew up with, like, I don't want to say my poor late grandmother, God rest her soul, was like Granny Goodness, but I did have a very, like, 1930s Depression era passive aggressive, like, Midwestern grandmother. Like, I definitely, like, Granny Goodness is the only villain in comics that scares me because she reminds me of, like, ugh. Like, she terrifies me. I hate her.
I hear it from a lot of people. I really do.
Ugh. I can't do it. Like, and she just reminds me so much of, like, and, like, my grandma in real life meant well, obviously, but it was just that constant, like, oh, don't worry, you'll lose the weight. Like, what? Okay, what are you talking about?
Wow.
Or, like, or, oh, don't worry. Oh, do you really think your hair, are you going to go back to blonde soon? Like, whoa, okay, I don't know. Like, what are you doing? Just that, like, an endless, like, and so, like, when Barda was like, I'm too tall, I was like, okay, like, that's real. That's too real for me. I don't like this.
So let's talk about Granny Goodness, because, like, I think that when Granny Goodness got killed, multiple people emailed me to freak out in my direction. What did you guys think about that scene and how that was handled, and also the choice to kill Granny Goodness?
Oh man, go ahead.
It's hard. It's hard because I'm cynical. I don't really believe anybody's dead until like the end of the arc, so I'm not really sure. But you know, I didn't have any strong feelings about Granny Goodness, and at least not as strong as I've been hearing. But I thought it was done. It was done well in the sense that, you know, Scott's going to question it, and Bart is like, you know what, fuck it, I'll do it. Mm-hmm. You know, because you know, I think, and she did it for him more than anything else. I think what surprised me was the next issue when we find out that she was beheaded. That kind of caught me off guard. That was like, I was like, whoa. Like, it just, to me, it got real, because you don't really see that. You know? So that's kind of threw me off a little bit,
Yeah, it was, especially in that issue, I think that was like, it was so surprising to me the way it happened, and like the constant, I love the motif as much as it makes me like deeply uncomfortable for my own issues or whatever. Like the idea that like Scott is never sure whether or not Granny was actually kind to him. Like he was never sure whether or not like Granny was actually like doing what she thought was best for him, even if she was, you know, obviously like torturing him. Like she's obviously a horrible person, but like, did she think that was what was the best, or did she think that she was actually making him stronger or whatever? I love that Scott's uncertainty gets juxtaposed so starkly against Sparta's like absolute certainty. Like, nope, she was terrible. I don't like this. Like, I can't do it. And having it kind of culminate so quickly into that idea that like Scott's going to stand there and listen to her, even though she might be full of shit. But Sparta's just going to be like, nope, I'm going to take my rod and we're going to beat her to death right away. Like, okay.
See, and this probably going to laugh, but this makes me think about my own relationship, how it's one of those things where I'm always unsure, should I listen to this person? And then meanwhile my fiance is like, no, this person's trash. No. And I'm like, but I feel this way. No, you're too empathetic. So that's what really got me about that,
Yeah. It's hard, too, because, like, I mean, that just, it makes you really have to read into the whole unreliable narration aspect of it, because this isn't a book about Barda's perspective. It's a book about Scott. So when Scott is not sure whether or not Granny is telling him the truth, or whether or not she's doing something, you know, out of the kindness of her heart, quote unquote, we have to sit with that, too. Because, like, I don't know. I don't know if Barda was right to kill her. I mean, did she deserve to die? Yeah, probably. But in that moment, was she trying to help? Maybe. Like, I honestly, probably.
Yeah, I mean, she claims to be Darkseid's Highfather's inside agent. You know.
Yeah.
We really don't know.
So it could have been a mistake. It could have been. I love not knowing though. Like as much as it kind of like provokes that sort of like panic response in me to not know, I kind of love not knowing in this instance, because I don't think, and I mean like Anthony said, I don't believe that anyone's really gone, especially in this story.
Right.
Like I don't think anyone's like gone forever. So I really think, you know, kind of putting Granny off the board might have just been like a narrative, you know, move as much as it is like an actual like dramatic move, that, you know, she can't have her running around while everything else is happening. But she might be.
And I think working her in this way just also meant that they had the opportunity to really talk about abuse and familial abuse, you know, and so which is such an important theme. So I'm like, they brought it in for that. I'll tell you, I like completely cried when Forager died. I love Forager. He is such an amazing soul, and I completely buy and believe the way they handled it. There's always was this problem of the New Gods treating the bugs as being animals, animals that were just barely worthy of recognition. So the fact that, you know, like even Scott like doesn't really seem to quite treat Forager as having been his equal when he gets vaporized on his. Scott is upset by it, but you know he would be more upset with it had it been, you know, like if it had been a member of the Justice League or something, you know what I mean? Scott would have definitely been more freaked out. So that you see even Scott is like, they're not quite fully human. to him either. I thought that was like really brutal and well done. And how they had Light Ray emerge out of it. Oh my God.
Yeah. Well, that was interesting to me because I thought to myself, does Scott really fully understand what's happening?
Right.
You know, that's why I was like, does he really understand? Because I think a part of him doesn't fully know what the hell is going on, to be quite honest with you.
Right.
So, you know, it's one of those things. I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't even really know if he's dead.
Right.
Just like he may not really know, is Granny really dead? Like, that's why I keep going to this thing, like maybe he just has PTSD. Maybe he doesn't fully understand what's happening.
Right.
Because I know I don't.
Yeah, like, and if he does, you know, if he doesn't fully understand, or even if he does fully understand and just kind of like is not able to engage with it on that level because of his own, like he might have, like he's so damaged and wrapped up in himself right now. I mean, for good reason, obviously, but still, like he can't. It's hard for him to access the sort of empathy he needs to see what's going on with other people. Yeah, and I think that's a really fascinating, especially with like a main character in a cape and cowl book, like having a character that is not self-aware enough to understand where their heroism needs to happen is really fascinating. Right. And it's tragic because it makes him almost complicit in this, you know, this horrible war that's going on. Like he's not doing enough, but he can't do enough. And that's, you know, like, is there a way to kind of quantify that? Is there a way to still be a hero when you have to look out for yourself first? You know, like, where do those lines get drawn? I think it's, man, poor Scott.
Right, and then of course when Orion gives him that test of the true and the false, you know, I think that's when I was really like, something's going on with Scott, you know, and he's answering questions whether are true that I think even himself is making him realize maybe he really was, you know, an accomplice, and I think that's why he blows up at the end. Yeah.
Oh my God.
So let's talk about that sequence. That was one of the most challenging sequences.
Yeah. I still have my Twitter header is still Orion, like right after he gets the shit beat out of him, like reaching over and taking the shirt. Because I
saw that. I saw that.
Oh my God.
Oh, that was a great scene. Great scene.
And I feel like I made my Twitter header Orion from the Fourth World with the Mother Box talking about how he has his moods. Like, that is my one right now, which I feel like that was not a deliberate response to yours, but like it is though. Like I didn't know I was doing it when I did it, but like that is what was happening. So so like I guess my question is like with so Orion, you know, puts him on trial. He asks him these series of questions. He demands that the answer be either true or false, not I don't know or no equivocation. And it has to be what you believe to be true. We know you don't actually know for sure what is or isn't true. We're asking you, what do you believe to be true? And it's sort of established that this is a trap that they're setting. Like, what is the trap that you think that this is for Scott? I'd love to hear from you guys.
Oh, man. That's a really tough question.
I have to read it like 80 times.
I'm sorry. No, you go ahead. Go ahead.
That's it.
I mean, I think the trap, at least thematically, and like this is like I'm obsessed with the dynamic between this version of Scott and this version of Orion. I think the trap is really sort of that it's duty. It's the ability to. I guess in a weird way, the trap is empathy. Like you see two different people who have engineered a way to turn off their empathy for two very different reasons. And I think that this Orion is very much like he is fighting a war that he believes that he is, you know, that he has to fight. Like he is acting as High Father, not because he really wants to or anything, but because he has to, and because this is the only way he's going to get through it, and this is what he has to do, duty bound. Whereas Scott has found a way to turn off his empathy because he can't kind of circumvent his own problems. Like he can't get through the issues that he has, you know, with his childhood or with anything, which like you can't really blame him for. But when you start questioning that, it becomes a riddle. It becomes really, you know, like there's no way to like, there's no easy answer and there's no like quick road out, which I think, I mean, that's really esoteric, but I think that that's kind of the trap that is between the two the two of them, is like whether or not you can do what is right and be true to yourself and remain whole in the process and still come out the other side as the same person. Does that make any sense? That probably doesn't make any sense. I don't know.
I think
it definitely does. No, I think yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can just say, like, I really feel like if, you know, we don't know what mental state this is in or what is even actually happening. Like, if this was just sort of, if this is just Orion and he is not being controlled by the anti-life equation, or this isn't just a projection of Orion from, you know, from Scott's perspective because of his trauma, if this is like actually Orion in the traditional format of the comic who is behaving in this super fascist manner, I would be really not okay with that, because I think that to me, like, the point of Orion as a character is that biology isn't destiny. And so if you have Orion actually being the same as Darkseid, then you're making a really deterministic statement.
Sure.
And going against Kirby. But I don't think that that's what's going to happen. But I'm constantly a little bit like on my seat, like, God, I really hope that's not where this is going, because I can't deal with that.
Sure. I mean, that's kind of why I like that, like, the carrot eating panel so much, is because I think that was, like, even if it's not a projection, like, I think it kind of punched through Orion. Like, if Orion is actually trying to put on this show, it kind of punched through his drag a little bit. Like, he's performing this role that he probably doesn't actually agree with, and that, you know, for whatever reason, he has kind of, you know, found himself backed into a corner. And then that stupid little carrot scene after he gets, you know, like, he could have exploded violently back, and instead he just eats a carrot with ranch on it. Like, oh. Like, I think that was
yeah, let me dip it first.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I'm really curious to see what happens with Orion soon. Like, I'm really anxious about it. I think it's going to be whatever happens. Like, I'm down for whatever, but I'm nervous about it.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's obviously been the biggest game changer for the characters is what we see in issue 7, where Big Barda has a baby. And, man, I am usually super against characters having babies, but I'm very pro this character, these particular, like, I just, with the, you know what I mean? Like, my immediate reaction usually is like, what makes you think all these fucking women want babies? Fuck you. Go away. Leave me alone. You're sexist. But I'm like, no, Barda and Scott, like, it feels very much like a natural extension of their relationship. And the fact that they're having a child is very much a rejection of Apocalypse and Apocalypse's system that they sought freedom for. You know, I at first I was like, well, why wouldn't Barda have discussed this with Scott before going and being knocked up? Like, it feels like a thing that they should discuss a couple. But then I had to remind myself, like, Barda is super compartmentalized, and just because that's not how I think people should deal with having a baby doesn't mean that that's not how Barda would just go and have a baby. Like, the whole sequence from issue 6 where they're talking about creating space in the apartment, and she doesn't straight up say, like, I'm pregnant and we're definitely having this baby. You know, it actually was like, yeah, no, that feels about right to me. The delivery sequence, I'm thankful that for once you see a comic that kind of portrays the stakes of childbirth and treats it, like, seriously as a thing that's dangerous and frightening, which is real.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not claiming to be an expert. I don't have any kids, but I think about this shit a lot because a lot of my friends are going through that right now, and I think it sounds like a horror movie. So I think this movie kind of acknowledges that. This issue acknowledges that.
But it is like a movie, though. I mean, I view this series like a romantic comedy in many ways, because you know, they're basically, they gutted a fish, used its entrails to go across, and they're just talking about moving furniture. You know, that is hilarious. I honestly was dying. I thought it was hilariously well done. You know what I mean? And I think it just shows that the ease in which they can do what they're doing and still talk about, well, you know, what are you doing tomorrow? Or, you know, let's talk about, you know, putting wallpaper up in a room that may not exist. Like, it's just, it's so well done. And again, in the 9-panel spaces, that, I can see, like, this in a movie.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and I mean, especially, like, in the birth sequence, like the fact that it was very high stakes and like it was really gross and like scary, but it's also like the female Furies are sitting in a lobby in LA being like, whatever, we're just going to sit here in our costumes. Like Mad Harriet's going to graffiti on the wall. Who cares? Like,
who cares?
Perfect. That's so mundane and so, slice of life, where it does feel like a comedy, even though it's like, they could have just given birth to like the Antichrist. Like that could have literally just happened. That too. But it's, it's still goofy and weird and funny. The ballet doesn't want to park for them. Big Barda's first name is Big.
My God. Oh my God. And I just came from LA and I can see all of that happening.
Oh my God. I live in LA. That's the other, like, this thing about how, like, Tom King was born in LA, but he lives in DC now. But, like, he always will say, in interviews, like, this is his love letter to LA and everything. And, like, my God, there's so many, like, just little things from, like, yep. Like, oh, God, parking and Olympic and going through, like, any sort of, like, ballets that don't want to engage with you. Like, oh, God, yep, that's 100%. People wanting to take selfies on the street, just the way that, like, the brunch places are laid out. Like, all of that. All of that is 100% authentic to the city. Whew.
Well, that's good. But, yeah, Scott and Barda are definitely known for the quality of their banter, and they really do maintain that so well through this series. It's part of why people love them.
Oh man, it's just like I am always fascinated too by the idea of weaving so much humor and so much overt humor into something that is like, how do you weave jokes and gags and visual gags and like all this fun banter into a book that starts with such a graphic suicide attempt? Like, how do you not trivialize the stakes and the violence and, the horror of what's going on when you're also, having kind of punchline panels that are setting up to all these moments, which is like, I think that they walk that line so well, because too far either direction, it becomes, on one side it becomes like a Greek tragedy, like you don't want to, like, you only have to read it to get through it. On the other side, it becomes like a total joke in which, like, it trivializes everything and you don't want to take anything seriously. Like, that's a really dangerous line to ride. And I think so far, at least 7 issues in, they've done a really good job, but I'm always kind of like hoping that they're not going to step over. Like, I'm always on the edge of my seat. Like, please don't do it. Please don't do it. Just ride this line. It's perfect. It's right where you are.
Mm. The sequence with the knife that Bernadette gives Scott is just remarkable. Like, it really shows that they have an understanding of the female Furies. Like, I think that a lot of writers kind of treat them like they're all just the same. And it was a very limited glimpses we have of each one of them. Like, no, they've actually realized each character as their own person and personality, and like done these creations justice in those ways. And Bernadette saying, as I said before, when we return to war, I will use it to kill you. And Scott's like, okay, because he's really tired. It's just the most them thing ever. Oh God. And I'm okay with his name being Jacob as the baby. Like, they talk about it in terms of the Jacob's ladder, but it's also like goes back to the Bible thing. Jacob, wrestled with an angel, and I think that there could be some specific biblical relevance to that. And I also appreciate that. So one of the things that they've been doing throughout each issue is having dialogue that comes straight from the original Mr. Miracle comics, juxtaposed in the ends, generally in the ends of each issue, juxtaposed with the visuals. And in the case of having the baby one, they're like it's the lump. Which is and it was such a great play on like the battle of the id and the baby as the id, and the fighting the lump in the realm of the id is like one of the issues of the original Mr. Miracle series, and what a great parallel they found there. I would just say moment, like, I mean, it's
that moment made me like
but
that moment like made me put the book down and be like, no fucking way. Like, they couldn't have pulled this off. There's no way that they could have made that joke that well and had it like just organically happen. This had to have been like the moment they pitched the book on or something. Like, God, the baby as the lump. Are you kidding me? It was one of my favorite. I think that's up to this point has been one of my favorite like moments so far, is that like stinger. Just the idea of, I don't like babies. So the idea of like actually like literally just saying the baby is this trap engineered to kind of ensnare you. It was so, I don't know, maybe that's cynical of me, but
no,
I thought that
you're
was
so right on, Jude. Man, oh my God, thank you. Yes.
And like both Mitch and Tom are dads. Like they like, I don't know, it's a little dark to put it that way, but like, I mean, that's so self-aware. The idea that like, here's this baby, it's also a trap. Okay, join us next month. Like, okay. I don't know. It's wild. I'm terrified of what's going to happen with this kid. I'm absolutely terrified.
Yeah, I'm really invested. I guess speaking of that, let's talk about the face of God, right? Because they talk about the baby. He's a new God, a new God. You know, there have been other young new gods created before as well, but this particular circumstance in this time and place where it's happening, we know that the new gods have lost a lot of people in this most recent war, if in fact it's actually a thing that's happening. A constant point of dialogue in quote jokes that are told in the past. On Earth and in lots of dialogue is just the question about what is the face of God.
Yeah.
I think yeah.
I don't know. That's one of like the most challenging things about the book to me is like this idea that like, can you know things that are inherently unknowable? You know, like, can you escape from traps that are inherently inescapable? Like, is escaping one trap getting you into another one? Is living a trap? Is love a trap? Like, it's these, you know, these unanswerable questions, and I feel like knowing the face of God or, like, knowing this unknowable thing kind of manifests that and articulates that in a really, like, literal and, you know, physical way where, you know, like, you can, if you know someone's face, you can describe it, you can draw it, you can, you know, like, you can look at it, but what if that is something that you can't do? Like, what if you take away that sort of, like, corporeal form of this thing that should be so physical and try to talk about it anyway? It's, you know, like, I feel like that kind of articulates the whole thesis of the book in a weird way, but in like I don't know, I'm not a religious person. I don't know spirituality all that well. So it's hard for me to talk about it extensively, but it's, you know, it's something that I always like to pay attention to.
I can talk a little bit about the spiritual stuff from my experience, but, you know, I think I go back to issue 1 in this whole idea of, you know, him trying to commit suicide, and maybe that's why his psyche to me is fractured. But I think that there's always that saying that when you're that close to death, you know what I mean, you have a different perspective. You know what I mean? And maybe this whole idea of him escaping death is what led him to seeing the face of God. You know, and I think that, what does that mean? I mean, death is the one thing he either has or has not escaped. And that face could be Darkseid, you know. And does that mean that Darkseid is the God that he is referring to or thinking about? What does that mean? But I think it's connected to death for him. And again, assuming that Orion has, you know, passed and now he's the High Father, he only saw death when he saw what happened to Orion. I mean, he only saw the face of God when he saw that happen to Orion. I mean, he didn't see it when other people were killed in front of him, but I think that was very, it affected him a lot to that point where, you know, he didn't get a chance to talk to his brother. He didn't get a chance to tell him how he feels. Who knows what he would have said. But in that moment was so shocking that he saw this face, which is probably Darkseid. So I think it's definitely connected to death.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I think that, I mean, the anti-life equation is such a big portion of, you know, like kind of New Gods mythology, and this idea that, like, well, maybe Orion wasn't really Orion at that point. Like, maybe he was, you know, maybe seeing, because, like, you know, the anti-life equation, when you say it out loud, it just sounds like you're talking about, like, a literal equation, but, like, the idea that, like, there are these things that you can't know and you can't, you know, manifest in any sort of way. but what if it's actually written on a person? Like, what if a person becomes that thing in a specific moment that is supposed to be, I guess kind of private, if you would consider death to be a private thing. What if you seeing that moment also, kind of opens the door? I don't know, maybe the face of God has something to do with the anti-life equation as well, or something. I don't know. It's so philosophical.
Actually a very good point. That's a very good point. Yeah.
And one of the other things, right, is that they are new gods. It's complicated because, Jack Kirby designed these characters, and as Jews, we're not supposed to draw God. We're allowed to draw other people's gods because those aren't real gods, but we're not allowed to draw, the actual God who is one,
Sure.
So I have to think about, these are gods that exist in sort of a mythological context, and they spend a lot of time talking about the gods of Earth here. They talk about Christmas, which is certainly not something that would exist on Apocalypse or New Genesis. I mean, Big Barda and Mr. Miracle are the most Americanized new gods characters, right? They've been here forever. So it doesn't surprise me that they think about these things, but there's a weird sort of juxtaposition between them talking about these human and earth terms for God, and the fact that they themselves are also gods, and that's in their name.
Right.
That's in
I think, especially when you kind of look at all of Kirby's work as this sort of response to the things that he lived through in his life. Just I like to come to my Kirby analysis because I'm a World War II history nerd, and I love war comics especially, and their relationship to superheroes, and this idea that Kirby lived through this horrible trauma of being literally active duty as a scout in World War II, front lines, going through it, and then had to come home and deal with it. And I think you can really see that, especially you can see it in a lot of his work. Obviously he literally does comics about the war. You can find it really obviously, but when you also look at, his more superheroic works, and especially The Fourth World, looking at these sort of big philosophical questions about, how do you find meaning in something that inherently feels meaningless? How do you find purpose in something that feels like it was designed just to be horrible? How do you live with yourself after you kind of experience these things? And I think, when you're put through something like that, when you're, forced to undergo this sort of mass trauma that is really only shared, among a small group of people, how do you articulate that in a way that makes sense to people who are outside of your experience? How do you make that apparent? And I think that in this sense, because Tom King was also, not in the military, but he was CIA. He's been involved in, all sorts of horrible, traumatic events. At least, that's from what we can assume if you read, Sheriff of Babylon or anything like that. I think that's, coming to this sort of the question of well, what's the face of God? It's also about, trying to articulate and express these things that you've gone through for people who will never experience what you've experienced. There's no way you can go back and live through World War II. There's no way you can go back and live through immediately post 9/11 wars. You can't do it. There's no way you can. Unless you weren't there, you have to figure out a way to talk about that. And I think that knowing the face of God is a really great way to kind of manifest that question. I don't know. Again, that might not make any sense, but that's kind of what I've been looking at.
I think it does. What do you think about the repetition of the phrase "dark side is"? I like that the comic itself even jokes about why are people always saying "dark side is"? I think it's just to sound cool. Do you think it's just to sound cool? What do you think is the significance of it?
It's funny because the first couple of comics I'm like, what is this? This is driving me nuts. But I think as it got as I got more into it, I realized that I feel the phrase dark side is he just is. He's there. He is. Or again, if we're asking this question about the face of God, dark side is. So it could be that as well. So I didn't think it was something that was just it's there for a reason, and I have a feeling it's just another riddle in this book. It's just another trap that we need to figure out. So I think it's very significant, and he places it very, very well.
Yeah, I think when you say dark side it's just like saying like death is coming. Like, it's about inevitability. Like there's just no, like dark side is never not going to exist. Like he is the ultimate end. He's the ultimate final boss of Scott's story, but of like everybody's story, really. Like if dark side represents death, then like what are you gonna do? Like you can't fight that. You can't, pull your big hero shit and just kind of outmaneuver him. Like he just is. He just exists. And that's a reality you kind of have to come to, especially when you're, directly involved with his story, in the context of the DCU and of the context of like the pantheon of new gods. Like it's, it's in a weird way, it's like an anti Hakuna Matata like phrase. Like it's like the totally opposite of like, like no worries. It's like, well, you've always got something to worry about, and it's this.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's that evil just exists, and it's going to kind of be a presence and peep up over the bend.
Yeah.
Regardless of how we try to live our lives, I think it's sort of where they're going at it.
Yeah.
Well, we're rounding up on the hour, which breaks my heart because I could actually keep talking about this with you guys for a very long time.
Yeah, this has been fun.
But actually, we have a little flexibility. This is good. But I know we're going to wrap up soon, but not entirely done. Are there things that about the series, Tony, that you, as someone who is kind of coming at this from a newer perspective, that like you just are find like challenging? Are there things that are harder to approach that you think maybe? Like what should a new person be thinking about coming into reading this?
I honestly don't find anything challenging. I think what a new person may find challenging is who the different people are. And I kind of had a passing reference to who the new gods were. So none. I hadn't seen a face where I was like, well, who the hell is that? I knew who Oberon was. I knew all that. So I think that going into this, it's probably essential that you have at least a passing knowledge of what you should be reading. So I didn't have any challenges. And for me, I really love complicated stories because I don't think I read those enough, particularly in comic books. And honestly, and I don't know if this is good or bad, but I get a Watchmen feel when I read this book of this, where are we going next, and the way the narrative is laid out. So if for those who may not really be ready for complicated, mind-bending stories, this might be a challenge for them. I think some people go into comic books just really wanting something that's just not very thoughtful, and I don't mean to say that in a bad way, but people use comic books as an escape, and maybe they just want to see just action and not have to think much about it. But this is a book that you're really going to have to think and really have to figure out again what the end game is, and I love that.
I would definitely agree. I mean, I'm not coming to Mr. Miracle from like a new comics perspective, but every time I've recommended it to someone who, isn't really super familiar with comics, you always kind of have to hedge it a little bit because it's challenging. It kind of expects you to understand the lexicon of comics. And so if you're picking it up as someone who's maybe only read a couple comics in your life and has not really, experienced that sort of like, oh, well, this 9-panel grid is, every moment in the page is a different hour or a different moment. But in this 9-panel grid, all the panels are happening simultaneously. Or in this 9-panel grid, here's, this deviation kind of signifies this significance. And it's, that's a little, it's a vocabulary you kind of have to get your head wrapped around. And so for new readers, I always try to, kind of case it a little bit and say that like, oh, well, you might have to read it a little slow, or you might have to read it, kind of twice, but I think it's really worth it.
Right.
Which is, it's whether or not they want to get the worth out of it is the tricky part.
I think I think, like, you know, Tom King artists he chooses to work with, you know, this isn't the first comic where he's worked with somebody that had a really strong 9-panel grid focus. I mean, this has been the most, possibly the most, like, dedicated to just doing that. But, you know, I sometimes wonder if people use it as a shorthand for, like, this is serious but not formalistically explorative.
Yeah.
But I appreciate the density of this. And I definitely think, like, this is one comic that, like, you need to read it at full size. Like, you can't just read this on your cell phone. Like, I tried to do it at one point because I was, like, on the subway and I couldn't even, like, lift my hand. And I went back and I had to reread it, the whole thing again. Like, you need to be able to look at that detail. You need to have enough space to be to be reading it. It's not something you can look at small because of the amount of detail and because there's so many panels that are so similar to each other with only the slightest changes, and the changes are significant. It's such a freaking detail-laden comic.
Yeah. Actually, this is really interesting. But, like, I was interviewing Mitch Gerads at Emerald City or something, and I turned my recorder off, so I didn't actually, like, this is like me leading me to the door. But I was asking, you know, those pages that are in the book that have, like, little white little dots, like little, like, hash marks of, like, oh, well, they're, you know, like, they're weaving around here, like, to signify motion. Like, you know, like they're, like, sneaking through the camp, and it'll be, like, the little, like, white tick marks. And I was like, what are those about? Why are those a thing? And he was explaining that, like, he pulled inspiration for the art in the story from old, like, newspaper comics because he wanted to kind of evoke things that were of the era of Kirby that weren't Kirby's work and weren't actually influenced, you know, like, they weren't, like, superhero comics, and they weren't, you know, Marvel or DC. And so he's like, those are, like, Family Circus details, because that was the era for Family Circus and everything. And I'm like, that's really wild. That's totally wild. But, like, that's, you know, that's something that it enhances your experience of the comic. But, like, people who are not excited about comics probably aren't going to care about that at all, you know. But it's, you know, like, that's sort of, if you're looking at, you know, Bronze Age comics, like, where you can't really go far in the Bronze Age without finding things that are kind of derivative of Kirby's work. So where are you going to go?
Right.
The newspaper. Family Circus. Okay. Like, that's wild.
That's an interesting choice.
Yeah.
That's an interesting choice. I tend to be really critical of the way artists who aren't, like close followers of Jack Kirby, like the way someone like Walt Simonson is, like, a close follower of Jack Kirby.
Sure.
I'm often very critical of the way that very un-Kirby aesthetic related people will draw the most Kirby-esque of costumes. And Mitch has really done a miracle by, like, me being like, yes, these are fine, because I, like, don't think that about very, very many people.
Sure.
You know, there's something about the line that, even though it isn't, like, the really sharp, high contrast, almost cubist look, that I'm still okay with it. I'm, like, almost never okay with it, but he's managed to make me be okay with it, and to like it. But partially, like, I mean, the facial expressions, the way Scott looks haggard. He's, like, haggard and tired and so handsome, but doesn't, you know, it's just so fucking sensitive with the faces. Barda and the weight with her face. I mean, it's just amazing detail art on here, and I don't feel like enough people are talking about it. So I think I'm really glad that we've made a point to do so on this podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Mitch is doing incredible.
I like how
the humor
he
wouldn't
seems
land without it.
Yeah.
Right. I like the way he seems to wear a different Justice League shirt. Like, it's Batman or Superman, or, you know, and I will, and I don't know if you've noticed this, but when she was giving birth, there were the wavelengths, and it was specifically in a W, and I'm like, did he do that on purpose?
Yeah.
Wow.
And then there was the Omega symbol in there too. Like the heart monitor said the Omega symbol too. It was like, whoa.
Yeah. Little details. I'm going to love to purchase this via graphic novel. That I will tell you that.
Yeah. I'm so glad that they're holding off to release it just as a 12-issue, like, hardcover. Like, they're not doing 2 volumes. It's just going to be a 12-issue. Like, here's the omnibus. It's good to go. And I think that's so smart.
Okay. Interesting. So, do either of you guys feel strongly about, like, where do you think this is? Is Scott in purgatory? Is this the afterlife?
Oh.
Is he just having PTSD? I feel like if you don't have to answer this question if you're like, let's just see where it goes. But if you have strong feelings about these matters, it sounds, Tony, like you might have a particular take on what's happening that you would want to share.
Yeah, I feel like he's living. He's going through something, and I think a lot of it is mental, and that could be that he's getting jerked around too. It could be that as well, but my mind might change because I wasn't expecting her to have a baby, so I think that changes things a little bit unless him having a child changes the way he starts thinking, or maybe he looks at things differently, or maybe the baby is the anti-life equation. I don't know. And it just, I think it's going to be very interesting, and I wouldn't be surprised if his mental thoughts or the way things are drawn are different because of the lump. To be quite honest with you.
Right. I'm very much of two minds of this whole thing, because like when I was originally reading, I kind of want to, the first time through reading the first 6 issues, I haven't reread 7 yet, but like the first time through the first 6, I was very hesitant to be like, I don't want this to be like a Citizen Kane moment. Like I don't want it to be like,
right.
Like, oh, well, here's the puzzle to be solved, or like, and I don't want it to be like, oh, it was all, he was reminiscing and he's actually, sitting on a hospital bed or whatever.
Oh my gosh.
Like,
right.
I don't want that. Like, I definitely don't want that. But I don't know if I want it to be real. And so it puts me in a really weird position, because I don't want this to be for nothing. And I don't want it to be like a gimmick that kind of wraps up at the end. I want it to have, consequence, and I want it to have import. However, I don't want Orion to be dead. I don't want Granny to be gone forever. Like, I don't want these horrible things to have really happened and to not have any weight to them, Like, it's very, it's put me in a really complicated spot. And so I'm always nervous about, like, I'm excited, but I'm anxious about whatever is going to happen next, because I don't know how this is going to be reconciled with the rest of the DCU. And I think that it should definitely be reconciled with the rest of the DCU. So.
I mean, there's a whole Bug comics that's been going that has amazing,
I know.
Flawless, like all that art. Well, I think I sort of been, I'll just say, like, to me, like, I would rather Orion be dead than Orion be fascist, because if he dies a hero, then, like, that's legitimate. But if he, like, is fascist, then I think that's an insult to the philosophy of Jack Kirby. But that said, do I have an opinion on whether this is the trauma that he's experiencing in his head, or is he in purgatory? Is the anti-life equation warping how the world is structured, like, and how people are experiencing it? I don't know. I feel like it's going to be something. We'll see what it is. I'm here to continue, and see where they go with that. Right. It'll be worth my while to see. And if I have to write a political essay at the end of the day about being angry, then I'll do it. But for now, it is definitely worthy art. It is worthy of your consideration. And I've cried, I've laughed, like so many damn feelings. And I feel like we've hardly had an opportunity to talk about how much we love Barda, but I think it can be safely said everybody loves Barda. She's the greatest freaking character.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Like, nobody else has that voice, and nobody else has that sort of physical presence in a comic. And I think she's the most heroic, because she's the person who just out of love defected from, and came to Earth. And you see her complete, like, devotion to Scott in ways that are not, that are strong. And it's not like, I just need my husband. It's like, no, this is like the most powerful love. And
right.
So it kills
me
that we have to wrap. But apparently you have to go to places or something. Whatever. So tell our listeners where we can find each of you guys on the internet, and if you have anything big coming out, where they can find it. Tony, where are you on the internet? Where can your work be found?
Well, first you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram, and sometimes Tumblr when I decide to use it, as at Latin Negro. And as far as my work, you can go to my website, It is anthonyotero.com, or again, I have links that go from any of my social media pages. At the moment, both my books are on Amazon. I would just search under my name. And Puerto Rico Strong is currently being sold at Amazon, and they're in comic book stores, and I believe bookstores as of last week. So, yeah.
Nice. Awesome. Yes, it is out now. Definitely get it, guys. It's really, really great and a great cause. And Meg, where can folks find you on the internet?
Well, I'm primarily on Twitter. It's at Rusty Polished, which is like RUSTY and then polished in the past tense. And then my work, I'm a freelancer and I'm really hardcore living that freelance lifestyle. So I'm kind of everywhere. You can find me typically at DC's website. I do a monthly column about relationships in the DCU, and I also write about every issue of Mr. Miracle as they come out. So that usually happens on the Thursday or Friday after the issue drops. So you can look for me there, and then otherwise I'm on CBR and GameSpot and sometimes places like THR and Polygon and just kind of wherever the wind takes me, because that's what freelancers do. But yeah, it has been so nice to talk to you guys. And yeah.
Thanks. And folks should subscribe to Boy Problems podcast, for that way you can listen to the old episodes, and when new ones come back, you'll have those as well.
Yes. Hopefully soon. I'm very, very hopeful that it will happen relatively soon once I get my schedule situated. But Boy Problems is not dead. It's just kind of napping for right now.
It's just having some problems. That's all.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you guys again. And this has been Graphic Policy Radio. If you came to the episode late, you can go back and listen to the whole darn thing. We are going to be on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Stitcher, all under Graphic Policy. The episode will be up probably for the next couple hours. It'll be available on those web platforms, and you will be able to share it, listen to it, download it, etc. I'm Ilana Levin, also Ilana Brooklyn, Ilana_Brooklyn on Twitter all the damn time. I should really stop. I wrote up a review of Mr. Miracle issue 1 that I'm quite proud of, a Graphic Policy that you can take a look at a while back, and I've also written about Forever People and Other Fourth World Comics. If you look me up, you'll see those. Graphic Policy is at graphicpolicy.com and on Twitter and Tumblr and iTunes. We like to keep it simple. On Monday, we are not going to be taping an episode because it's Passover and it's also AwesomeCon. I hope folks will come to my 2 panels that I have at AwesomeCon in DC this upcoming weekend. I have one on geek activism, and another one is a panel on geeks and nonprofits working together to save the world. So check out my Twitter. I'll be posting links to those panels. See you guys at AwesomeCon in DC. And like we like to say at Graphic Policy Radio, keep it geeky.
Hey, thanks for watching the previous video from Graphic Policy Television. Just by watching, you help support our site. Thank you so much. Now, if you're watching these videos, you probably care about geeky things like movies, television, comic books, toys, games, video games, you name it. You can go and subscribe right now to our YouTube channel to stay in touch and catch all the new videos, or check out our website at graphicpolicy.com. There's a nice link on this end of the video. But as always, thank you for watching. Keep on rocking and keep it geeky.